Are you sick of being lied to?
You think that you're getting the whole picture.
There's always another side to every story.
Are you ready to see something different?
Like you've never experienced before.
Truth.
Integrity.
Health.
The nature of reality.
Transparency.
Empowering information.
New ways of looking at the world.
Music, news, alternative views.
Going where the mainstream dare not go.
Your voice has been silenced for far too long.
What have you got to say?
The world needs to change. The world is truly of our own making.
People are waking up.
It's time to take your power back.
The time is now.
It's time for a new voice. It's up to you.
We want you to be part of it.
We can do this.
Join us.
The people's voice.
In 2007, Madeleine Beth McCann, a 3-year-old British girl, disappeared from her bedroom in an apartment in Praia da Luz in Portugal. She was on holiday with her parents, her younger twin siblings, and a group of 7 family friends and their 5 children. Since that day, there has been a global search for young Madeleine McCann. The initial investigation by Portuguese police was subject to a great deal of criticism from Kate and Jerry McCann, who were also made arguidos, translated as formal suspects, by the Portuguese police. The McCanns, having set up a Find Madeleine fund within days of their daughter's disappearance, used some of the donations they received, from famous footballers to elderly ladies, to hire private detectives, all to no avail. In May 2011, the British Home Secretary Theresa May intervened and Scotland Yard set up Operation Grange in an attempt to solve the mystery of Madeleine's disappearance. What was initially a case review became a criminal inquiry. In October 2013, the Portuguese police reopened their own investigation, citing new evidence, and Scotland Yard released e-fit images of men they wanted to trace. The official line is that Madeleine was taken during a pre-planned abduction, just put your teeth back in, or a burglary which went wrong. However, not everyone. African businessman Stephen Birch has spent well in excess of £50 pursuing his own investigation into the missing child. Stephen joins us by Skype from Swy. Hello, Stephen. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Sonia. Thank you for having me on your show.
So, Stephen, can you tell me why you have spent in excess of £50,000 searching for a child that you don't personally know and you're not related to in any way?
Well, Sonia, when you say in excess of 50,000, I've probably spent R1 million in direct costs and probably R6 million worth of loss of income as a result of working on the case full-time for 3 years. To answer your question, initially I started the investigation out of world famous, and but that changed very quickly, because 3 to 4 months into the investigation it became more of a spiritual journey for me. And to the latter part of my investigation, I became driven more by frustration and anger than anything else. So right. This has certainly been a mixed journey for me, being motivated by. Well, you know, this. First of all, let me state the following: that this case is about a little girl who's crying out to be found. And she's not being found, and that for me is a huge problem. I feel that Madeleine is asking the world and everybody to find her, and it's really not happening. I sincerely believe that the remains of Madeleine McCann lie buried underneath a rear gravel driveway belonging to the initial suspect / arguido, Robert Murat.
Right.
There are various reasons why I and my team believe that, and possibly I could just go into that. Initially, there was a huge drive to get into Robert Murat's property. Right. That drive was created by members of the initial Tapas 9 and Jane Tanner being one of the key witnesses in this case.
Okay.
The the fact that the point that made me extremely suspicious that Madeleine could be buried in the Murat property was Jane Tanner's initial sighting of the suspect being a Rastafarian type or Rastafarian-looking person, and 4 days later she identifies Robert Murat as this clean-shaven, business-looking type man.
Indeed.
Now there's a huge contrast between identifying a Rasta-type-looking man and a clean-shaven businessman, and that was where I initially started to become suspicious of the Murat property. You have this huge drive to get into the Murat property.
Right.
And then suddenly, on the 3rd of November, a meeting occurs behind closed doors with Robert Murat, his aunt Sally, and his uncle Ralph, together with his attorney and Brian Kennedy, who was funding the investigation to a degree for the McCanns, and Brian's attorney Edward Smethurst.
Right.
So you have this private, secretive meeting occurring behind closed doors, and suddenly there's a complete turnaround, and everybody backs off the Murat property.
Right. Now, just for the point of clarity, Brian Kennedy was involved in setting up the Find Madeleine Fund, I believe. Is that correct?
Correct. He played a pivotal role in assisting the McCanns with regard to this investigation.
Fine. Okay.
So you have this huge drive to get into the Murat property, and then suddenly, for some unbeknown reason, you have a complete 180 degrees where everybody then backs off.
Right.
The Sun newspaper at that stage had created or written 3 articles in where they were really driving and making Robert Murat the suspect, and suddenly, after that meeting of the 3rd of November, the Sun does a complete 180 as well and says, no, there's actually somebody in town that looks very similar to Robert.
Right.
On the 20th of November, you have Jane Tanner retracting her statement that Robert is the suspect on Panorama, on BBC Panorama. So
right.
that
in
its own right is extremely suspicious. Why this huge drive to get into the property, and then why a complete 180 to get out of the property?
Fine. So that is why your focus became on Robert Murat's property. So can you tell me then how you then followed that up?
Well, I began, one of the things that I wrote a hypothesis, and I took the motor vehicle out of the equation. I said that I adopted Almiral's findings within the apartment, and considering that there was no vehicle in the equation, she had to be buried fairly close to where she went missing.
And it is a very brief distance, isn't it, between the holiday apartment and Robert Murat's home, or the home of his mother, rather.
In our meet, it's 150 meters.
150 meters.
150 meters, but in feet, it's just over 400 feet.
Fine.
Right. So, what I was also quite fortunate enough to get hold of photographs of the yacht. Those photographs were taken on the 15th of May by a UK journalist, and then October of that same year, I managed to get hold of some photographs of the Murat property, and I was able to compare those 2 photographs. And in both photographs, we saw a pile of building rubble with a wooden plank on top of it, and it showed us clearly that the property in question could not have been searched.
Right.
Now, the Portuguese Prime Minister, Mr. José Sócrates, wrote me a letter, and he said to me that the University of Aveiro went into the property on the 4th and 5th of August and used ground-penetrating radar equipment and scanned the Murat property to look for any objects that could be buried beneath the ground.
Right.
That's impossible. And in actual fact, I challenged the Prime Minister of Portugal in Correio de Manhã's Portugal's biggest newspaper, Correio de Manhã, and I said to the Prime Minister, Mr. Prime Minister, how could the University of Aveiro have scanned that ground when a ground-penetrating radar machine needs to be pushed over flat ground? It cannot be pushed over a pile of building rubble. It looks very similar to a lawnmower.
Right.
So how did you scan the ground? Now, the exact position where that pile of building rubble is, a driveway has been constructed there today, a small gravel driveway,
right.
an insignificant gravel driveway that serves no purpose. It's in the backyard of Mr. Murat's property, not on the front, in the front yard, where he has a large driveway with brick paving. You have this insignificant gravel driveway with a retaining wall built over the exact spot where that pile of building rubble lay.
Right. So what did you do, Stephen?
Well, I went to Portugal and I conducted surveillance with my team over that property for 4 days, and then we went into the property, and on 3 occasions, we scanned that little gravel driveway,
right.
the exact spot where that building rubble lay. And what we did was we superimposed photographs over each other to get the exact position of the pile of rubble in relation to the driveway that has now been constructed there.
How did you access Robert Murat's home?
Well, that's an interesting story. We did surveillance of his property for 4 days, and we noticed that the Ocean Club had gardeners coming in to do gardening at about 6 o'clock each morning, at 6 a.m. So we knew that we needed to get into Murat's property and out of Murat's property before 6 a.m. in the morning. So what I did was, with my team, I climbed over the fence. It's a small rear fence at the back of Robert's property, and I carried the ground penetrating machine onto his driveway, and I scanned his driveway for 40 minutes at a time.
So you did that without permission, though, didn't you?
Without consent, that's right.
Okay, right. So, please.
We had technical problems with setting up the machine, but on the third time I went into the property, I believe I recovered what I believe to be her remains underneath the driveway.
Okay, tell me more about your findings, please.
Well, without accusing Mr. Jerry McCann, for me, there is two sightings that I believe have relevance to this case. The world is focused on the Smith sighting. Now, the Smith sighting is on the other side of town, and 10 members of the Smith family from Ireland believe they saw Mr. Jerry McCann come running down the hill carrying Madeleine. What the world is not focusing on is the second sighting of Jerry McCann. That is the sighting where Jerry McCann is seen 15 meters from the back fence line of Robert Murat's property. There were 2 gentlemen that were staying in an apartment. They were Neil Berry and Raj Balu, who happened to be sitting on their balcony, which is 15 meters from the back fence line of Mr. Robert Murat's property. That back fence line is only 1.5 meters high. It's very low. It's quite easy to climb over.
I believe that you then got in touch with a number of various independent sources to seek advice about where you should take this further. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, the first thing you need to understand is that the evidence that I've presented for the first time in the Madeleine McCann case is actually hard evidence. All the other sightings are all hearsay and speculation. Here we're sitting with hard physical evidence. These scans were sent to 5 independent experts in ground penetrating radar and the evaluation of scans. 3 of them were from the USA, 1 was from the excess of 20 years each in the field of using ground penetrating radar equipment and also recovering bodies. And each of these 5 gentlemen that have analyzed the scan say there's something there, there's a cavity, there's an object on it, and our recommendation is immediately excavate that driveway.
Okay, so what has been the response to your findings? I mean, as a parent, if somebody who I didn't know, and heaven forbid that I was ever in such a situation, I would be overjoyed that somebody was prepared to put their money where their mouth is and go in search of my child. So just tell me, what's been the response so far from the McCanns to you being prepared to do that?
Well, I think before we go to the response, let's look at the world coverage. My findings have
Which has been phenomenal.
Well, and this is a very interesting point, because I have what's called the reasonable man theory.
Right.
And my findings have been reported in 255 articles worldwide.
Right.
The Murat driveway has been reported 18 times in Portugal's biggest newspaper, Correio da Manhã. It has Correio TV as well, but it sells 1 out of every 2 newspapers in Portugal.
Right.
So here you have worldwide coverage, except for the UK, where I believe there's a moratorium on my finding. You have my findings going worldwide, and then you ask yourself the question, what would a reasonable person do under these circumstances? And I use that term quite loosely,
sure,
as far as parents are concerned, as far as governments are concerned. And a reasonable parent, after that type of worldwide coverage and the findings of the professionals, would immediately call for the excavation of the driveway. However, Kate McCann does not want the driveway dug up. Her response to me on BBC TV is very strange.
I think you're referring to an interview on ITV, British station ITV. Is that correct? With this morning, I think, when Kate McCann was asked about you, and her response was obviously quite dismissive. Who are you? That sort of attitude. Is that what you're referring to?
That is,
right.
And you will see that to a large extent, my findings create a tremendous amount of stress for Kate, and that is evident in the way that she reacts when my name is mentioned. So you have the parents not wanting to acknowledge my finding, or Kate not wanting to acknowledge my findings, and you have to ask yourself the question: is that reasonable? Is it reasonable for a mother not to call for an excavation of a simple gravel driveway that has received worldwide attention? Has 5 international experts stating or recommending that it be immediately dug up, and Kate McCann says, I'm not interested in having this driveway dug up.
Right. Tell me about the other players involved in this, most notably, obviously, Goncalo Amaral. What has been his response to your findings?
Well, Goncalo Amaral's response was very strange. When he was approached by Correia and asked about my findings, he said that it had no credibility. And that worried me, because Goncalo is currently involved in a huge legal battle with the McCanns that have brought a damages claim against him. So why would Goncalo not support my findings? Because if the child is found 130 meters from the apartment, it will certainly strengthen his case in his legal battle with the McCanns, especially considering that he said that he believes that they're suspects.
Okay.
Well, I believe that the DNA that was found in the McCann car 25 days after Madeleine disappeared, and that vehicle, that Renault Scenic, was hired 25 days after Madeleine went missing. I believe that DNA was planted.
And you're talking about the DNA detected by the cadaver dogs?
Well, I'm talking about the DNA, correct, but also the DNA that was found beneath the spare wheel of the Renault Scenic by Portuguese police.
Why would Portuguese police plant such a thing, Stephen?
Well, I have to be very careful what I say, and I don't want to end up in a libel suit.
Absolutely.
But the planting of the DNA. Well, first of all, we know Brian Healy, Kate McCann's father, told Martin Brunt in an interview that he believes that the DNA was planted in the car. That's the first point.
Right.
So we have the father of one of the parents acknowledging that the DNA was planted in the car.
Right.
The DNA planting in the McCann car immediately shifted the focus off the Murat property back onto the McCanns. Now, it's my opinion that Robert Murat was made an scapegoat, and that the child was buried in his garden and Robert Murat was framed. I believe that the planting of the DNA taken off the corpse in the Murat property immediately shifted the focus away from the Murat property and back onto the McCanns as suspects.
Right, I see.
And I believe that the evidence that DNA was planted in that vehicle sits in 4 secret files held with the UK Home Office Secretary, Theresa May. Now, one of the things that I'm going to ask for, and I'm going to campaign with the UK people, and it's not me, I can't do this on my own, I need the UK people to stand behind me, is to call for the release of those 4 secret Theresa May files. You see, you don't keep files secret unless you've got something to hide. And for me, Theresa May acknowledges that she holds information of a diplomatically sensitive nature pertaining to the Madeleine McCann case that was sent to her by Portuguese authorities that she cannot release, which will affect the diplomatic relations of the 2 countries. That's 633 years worth of diplomatic relations on the line in 4 files.
I see.
Now, the question that I'm asking is that if Theresa May holds information about the Madeleine McCann investigation in 4 secret files that could destroy the diplomatic relations, how do we as the public know that that information did not affect the way that this case was investigated, firstly, and how do we know that it did not affect the outcome of the case?
Well, wait a second, Stephen. So if you believe that's the case, what was the response of the Portuguese Prime Minister to your findings?
Well, this is also very interesting because I sent a report to Portugal's Attorney General with all my findings pertaining to what I believe to be Madeleine buried in the Murat property. It took the Portuguese Prime Minister 4 months to respond to me after my findings went worldwide, which I have a huge problem with that it took him 4 months. Portugal's Attorney General refused to respond to me. Portuguese police were told under no circumstances to talk to me, and in actual fact, Julio Barroso, who was the governor for the Algarve, warned me not to come back to Portugal and that my life could be in jeopardy if I did that.
He directly warned you of that?
Indirectly, he said to me, you better be careful if you come back to Portugal.
I see. And what about, coming back to the UK, what about the response of Scotland Yard to your findings?
Well, that's also very interesting because I had a very good relationship with Gary Redmond, who's a detective from Scotland Yard, and I was communicating with Gary on a regular basis before I left for Portugal. When my findings went worldwide, the Metropolitan Police advised Kate and Jerry McCann the day before my findings went worldwide. When my findings went worldwide, I got a 1-line email from Gary Redmond, who heads up the Leicestershire task team, saying, how did you get the scans off the machine? That was the full extent of his inquiry into my investigation and my findings. And here you have my findings going worldwide and Scotland Yard sending me a 1-liner saying, how did you get the scans off the machine? Well, I answered the question. I said, well, I used a computer stick and I downloaded it onto the computer stick. But surely, said Mr. Birch, can you fly out? Can we come and see you? How did you get your money? I mean, you're talking about 255 newspaper articles worldwide, 5 international experts saying excavate, and you ask yourself the question, what would a reasonable government do under these circumstances?
So you're saying that the responses for Portugal and the UK have been, in your opinion, entirely unnatural given your findings?
Most definitely. It's not reasonable. It's not reasonable to have that kind of response from 2 governments, considering the coverage that the findings have been given.
Right, so I assume, given everything else that you've considered, that you have a theory why this might be.
Well, let's go back to 2007 and let's paint this picture, or let me create the scenario as to what really occurred. At that stage, Portugal was hosting what was called the Treaty of Lisbon. And you had every single prime minister in Europe coming to Lisbon to sign the Treaty of Lisbon. What is interesting about the Treaty of Lisbon is, first of all, I think I'm under correction, it's the extension of the EU by 10 countries, but more important than that, it is the incorporation and the adoption and ratifying of the Charter of Human Rights. Now, you must understand that the EU was formed for the specific reason of creating a big trade market, and also the second and very important reason why the EU was formed was to protect individual citizens moving between different countries. So that's why you had EU law being formed. EU law served two purposes. One was for trade, the other was for the movement of individuals within the EU in safety. And the adoption and ratifying of the Charter of Human Rights in 2007 is a pivotal historic moment. It effectively allows individuals within the EU to be able to have human dignity and rights in all countries. In actual fact, the Charter of Human Rights has supremacy over the individual sovereign law within each of the different countries. I know for a fact that in 1972, the British Parliament agreed that EU law would take supremacy over its own sovereign law. So now you have an EU law which overrides all individual sovereign law of different countries. And so you have all the prime ministers in Lisbon at the time signing this treaty, and in my opinion, you have a little girl going missing, and you have Portuguese police planting DNA to solicit confessions out of the parents.
So you're saying that at the minimum, the UK and Portugal have conspired to conceal this?
Not only have they conspired to conceal it, they've broken international EU law. Now, that's a huge, huge problem, because you see, the Madeleine McCann case at the time had 1 in 7 people worldwide, I'm under correction, were watching this case unfold. And while this case is unfolding and you have this potential diplomatic situation arising, you've got all the prime ministers sitting in sitting in Lisbon about to sign a treaty.
Right.
So both countries, in my opinion, have breached the very law which they adopted and ratified that same year, and that's a huge, huge problem. Now, somebody has to be held accountable. In my opinion, this is a criminal action.
Right.
And if it is found that the ex-Chancellor Gordon Brown and José Socrates closed the Madeleine McCann case to prevent a diplomatic situation from arising, which is what we all suspect, that in essence is a criminal act, and it's a breach of the supreme EU law, and that's a huge, huge problem.
I mean, obviously, we have to point out that these are just your own personal allegations based on your own investigation. We have no reason to believe absolutely that there is any ground to believe in this, but this is, as I say, based on your own investigations. We certainly know that Gordon Brown had telephone communications with Gerry McCann after the disappearance of Madeleine, which is obviously highly unusual given that, many thousands of children disappear every year and certainly don't have a party, the ear of the current Prime Minister. So that in itself is clearly unusual. But tell me, Stephen, why do you think that, obviously the official version is that Madeleine McCann was abducted, possibly in a burglary that went wrong. So, why do you think that, A, you believe that there is a moratorium on your findings in the UK and that British people are not given the opportunity to look into your investigation? So why do you believe that the British people alone would be going along with that? Because obviously, as you've pointed out, it is a is a case of global interest. So people are doing their own investigations, their own digging into this case. So why would the British people ignore your findings?
Well, I think the biggest problem that we have is, in my opinion, that the British people are looking at this case wrong.
Right.
they split into two camps. They split into pro-McCann and anti-McCann. They're asking the wrong questions. They're wanting to, they're either defending or attacking the McCanns. What they need to be asking is, why is their government, you see, they're playing that role at the moment, and everyone on the street is wanting to be judge, jury, and detective.
Right.
And they're grasping at anybody evidence that is out there, and they're having to play this role because their own governments are failing to perform the role that they're supposed to be playing.
Right.
And what the British people need to really be doing is not ask, are the McCanns guilty or aren't the McCanns guilty? What they need to be asked is, why, number one, has the Murat driveway not been dug up? Why was the investigation closed for 6 years? Is that in accordance with EU law? Is that acceptable to close a case for 6 years on a missing child?
Right.
The voice of the British people is what, it's not about me and it's not about you. It's about a little girl that's missing, that's calling out to be found. And the British people need to actually, even when they go to the polls next time to vote for Cameron, is to say, well, do we want to vote for a man and put him back in position if potentially he's left a little British girl in Portugal to protect bilateral trade and diplomatic relations and breached every single EU law?
So you're suggesting that there's a higher agenda, and to fall into two camps of pro or anti-McCann, which is clearly the case. We only have to look at the internet to see how very real that is. You're suggesting that is merely a distraction tactic.
Well, there's been a lot of information that has been put in on the market, on the internet and out there for a specific reason. The British people need to focus on the UK government failing to do what it's supposed to be doing. The British people need to demand that the UK government perform the task that they're supposed to perform. It's not for the UK people to do that. They need to pressurize Theresa May to release those 4 files, because I believe that the minute those 4 files are released, we'll be able to see why the investigation was conducted in a particular way, whether it was conducted correctly. I can assure you that the minute those 4 secret files are released, the entire playing field is going to change, and it's going to force the UK government and the Portuguese government to come clean and to handle this investigation correctly and not to cover it up, because there's a huge cover up here. Right. And it's protected. I mean, the two countries have a bilateral trade in excess of £8 billion,
right,
of which a large portion of Portugal's component of that bilateral trade comes from tourism on the Algarve, which I'm sure you know.
Absolutely.
I think about 7 out of 10 people leaving the UK are on their way down to the Algarve.
Right.
So the British people need to get together. We have a Facebook page, and there's a lot of other people that are also driving campaigns. We have a Facebook page called Digging for Madeleine McCann. And we want to get that driveway dug up. And I'll tell you this, that if Madeleine is not underneath that driveway, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to scan that driveway to ascertain whether somebody has actually dug in that driveway. Right. The second thing is we're going to extract large portions of soil, and we're going to send it to our laboratories in the Netherlands, and we're going to check for DNA from seepage, and we're going to break down those soil samples. And then, last but not least, if Madeleine McCann is not there, and we find that she's not in any of the soil samples, and there's no foul play, and we were wrong, then I will be too glad to say, you know what, this is a site that's now been eliminated.
Right.
Possibility that Madeleine McCann is alive.
Right.
But we have physical hard evidence here, and we need to eliminate each option one by one. And this is an option that is 130 meters from the apartment. It's not India. It's not on an aeroplane. It's not an ice cream man selling an ice cream. You happen to see something. We have hard physical evidence 130 meters from the apartment 5A, Ocean Club, where she went missing. And this site needs to be eliminated. And once this site is eliminated one way or another, if need be, we can move to the next option and eliminate that. But we need to eliminate this option.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen Birch. Thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I should actually say that obviously we've given Kate and Jerry McCann the right to reply. They're absolutely entitled to that. We will always offer people the right to reply on the People's Voice. I've also, but I've not heard anything back yet. It went through their official spokesperson, Clarence Mitchell. No responses yet. But I've also seen the documentation to confirm that those independent specialists have said that there is clearly something there. The fifth one said they felt there was something there, certainly worth investigation, wasn't as categoric as the fourth. But, you know, we will keep you updated. The whole point about the People's Voice is to come to you with an alternative viewpoint about what's going on, as well as seeing what the mainstream is saying.